If you've ever felt the urge to escape the noise of the city, to trade the glow of streetlights for the flicker of a campfire, you're not alone. There's something primal about the woods, something that calls to us, promising peace, adventure, and maybe even a little danger. But what if I told you that some forests hold secrets darker than the night itself? That there are places where the trees seem to lean in, listening, and the wind carries whispers you're not meant to hear? Tonight, I'm going to share 3 true encounters that happened deep in the woods, stories that will make you think twice before you ever pitch a tent again. Before we dive in, let me ask you, have you ever felt watched while camping? Maybe you brushed it off as your imagination or blamed it on a curious animal. But what if it wasn't? What if, just beyond the reach of your flashlight, something was waiting, something that didn't want you there? Our first story comes from a man named Tyler, who, like so many of us, just wanted a break from the grind. He and his 2 best friends, Mark and Jamie, decided to spend a weekend camping in the Pine Barrens of New Jersey. They'd heard the legends, of course, the Jersey Devil, strange lights, the usual campfire tales. But they were skeptics, and besides, they were there for the hiking, the fishing, and the chance to unplug. The first day was perfect. The air was crisp, the sky a deep, endless blue. They set up camp near a small, clear stream, miles from the nearest road. As the sun dipped below the trees, they built a fire, cooked dinner, and laughed about the stories they'd heard. Tyler remembers feeling a sense of freedom he hadn't felt in years. No cell service, no deadlines, just the crackle of the fire and the chorus of crickets. But as the night deepened, something changed. The woods, which had felt alive and welcoming, suddenly seemed to close in. The fire's glow felt smaller, the darkness thicker. Mark was the first to notice it, a strange silence that fell over the forest. The crickets stopped. The frogs went quiet. Even the wind seemed to die. "Do you guys hear that?" Mark asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Tyler and Jamie listened. The silence was absolute, pressing in on them from all sides. It was as if the entire forest was holding its breath. Then, from somewhere in the darkness, came a sound, a low, guttural growl, so deep it seemed to vibrate in their chests. It wasn't a bear or a coyote. Tyler had grown up in the country. He knew those sounds. This was something else. Something wrong. Jamie tried to laugh it off, but his voice shook. "Probably just a fox," he said, but no one believed it. The growl came again, closer this time. The 3 friends huddled near the fire, their eyes straining to see beyond the circle of light. Tyler gripped his flashlight, but the beam seemed swallowed by the darkness. Then, just at the edge of the firelight, they saw it. 2 eyes, reflecting the flames, set far apart and much too high off the ground to belong to any animal they knew. The eyes blinked, slow and deliberate, never breaking contact. Mark stood up, holding a stick like a weapon. "Hey," he shouted, his voice cracking. "Get out of here." The eyes didn't move. If anything, they seemed to grow brighter, as if amused. Suddenly, the fire flared up, sending a shower of sparks into the air. In that brief burst of light, Tyler caught a glimpse of something massive, tall, hunched, covered in matted fur. Its mouth hung open, revealing rows of jagged teeth. And then, just as quickly, it was gone. The eyes vanished, swallowed by the night. For a long moment, none of them moved. Then Jamie broke the silence. "We need to leave. Now." They packed up in record time, barely bothering to put out the fire. As they stumbled through the woods, the growling followed them, always just out of sight. Branches snapped, shadows shifted, and every step felt like it might be their last. When they finally reached their car, Tyler looked back one last time. In the distance, at the edge of the trees, he saw those eyes again, watching, waiting. They never spoke about what happened that night, not really. But Tyler says he hasn't been camping since. Sometimes, when he's alone at night, he swears he can still hear that growl, feel those eyes on him. He wonders what would have happened if they'd stayed, if the fire had gone out, if they'd ignored the silence. Some places, he says, just aren't meant for people. The woods give, but they also take. And sometimes, they keep secrets that are better left alone. That was just the first encounter. If you're already feeling uneasy, you might want to turn on a light or maybe check your locks. Because the next story takes us even deeper into the unknown, into a place where the line between reality and nightmare blurs, and where one camper learned that some legends are all too real. If Tyler's story left you with a chill, you're not alone. But as unsettling as his encounter was, our next story comes from someone who thought she was prepared for anything the woods could throw at her. Her name is Rachel, and she grew up camping with her family every summer. She knew how to build a fire, read a map, and tell the difference between a raccoon and a bear by the tracks they left behind. She wasn't the type to scare easily. In fact, she prided herself on being the calm one, the voice of reason when others let their imaginations run wild. It was late September when Rachel decided to take a solo camping trip to clear her head after a tough breakup. She chose a spot in the Adirondacks, a place she'd visited before with her parents. The leaves were just starting to turn, painting the forest in shades of gold and crimson. The air was crisp, the sky cloudless. She set up her tent near a small lake, far from the main trails, and spent the afternoon hiking, taking photos, and enjoying the solitude. As dusk settled in, Rachel built a fire and cooked a simple dinner. She watched the sun dip below the trees, the sky fading from orange to deep blue. The world felt peaceful, almost sacred. She wrote in her journal, read a few chapters of a novel, and finally crawled into her sleeping bag, lulled by the gentle sounds of the forest. Sometime after midnight, Rachel woke to the sound of footsteps crunching in the leaves outside her tent. At first, she thought it was a deer or maybe a raccoon. She listened, heart pounding, as the steps circled her campsite. They were too heavy, too deliberate to be an animal. She reached for her flashlight and unzipped the tent just enough to peek outside. The fire had burned down to embers, casting a faint red glow. In the dim light, Rachel saw a figure standing at the edge of the trees. It was tall, thin, and completely still. She couldn't make out any features, just the outline, a silhouette darker than the night around it. "Hello?" she called, her voice trembling despite her best efforts to sound brave. The figure didn't move. It just stood there, watching. Rachel's mind raced. Was it a lost hiker? A park ranger? Or something else? She considered calling out again, but something in her gut told her to stay quiet. She ducked back inside the tent, zipped it shut, and grabbed the small hatchet she kept by her side. The footsteps started again, slow and deliberate, circling closer. She held her breath, listening as the figure moved around her tent, pausing every few steps. At one point, it stopped right outside, so close she could hear its breathing, slow, ragged, almost animalistic. She squeezed the hatchet tighter, every muscle in her body tense. Minutes passed, or maybe hours, Rachel couldn't tell. Eventually, the footsteps faded, swallowed by the night. She lay awake until dawn, too afraid to move. When the first light crept through the trees, Rachel finally unzipped her tent and stepped outside. The campsite looked normal, but as she walked around, she noticed something strange. All around her tent, the ground was covered in footprints, bare, human footprints, large and deep, circling again and again. They led off into the woods, disappearing among the trees. Rachel packed up as quickly as she could, her hands shaking. As she hiked back to her car, she kept glancing over her shoulder, half expecting to see that figure watching her from the shadows. She never did, but the feeling of being watched never left her. When she got home, Rachel tried to rationalize what had happened. Maybe it was a lost camper or someone playing a prank. But the more she thought about it, the less sense it made. Who walks barefoot through the woods in late September? Who stands motionless for hours, just watching? Rachel hasn't been camping alone since. She still loves the woods, but she's learned to respect them and to trust her instincts when something feels wrong. She says the scariest part wasn't the figure itself, but the way the forest seemed to conspire with it, hiding it just out of sight, muffling its footsteps, making her doubt her own senses. Sometimes she dreams about that night. In her dreams, she's back in the tent, listening to the footsteps, feeling the weight of those unseen eyes. She wakes up with her heart racing, the memory as vivid as the night it happened. If you've ever camped alone, you know that the woods can play tricks on your mind. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves can set your imagination racing. But sometimes it's not your imagination. Sometimes there really is something out there, something that doesn't want to be seen, but wants you to know it's there. Rachel's story is a reminder that the woods are beautiful, but they're also wild, unpredictable, and sometimes deeply unsettling. The next time you find yourself alone in the forest, remember, you're never really alone. We've heard from Tyler and Rachel, two people who went into the woods looking for peace and found something else entirely. But our final story is perhaps the most disturbing of all. It comes from a group of experienced campers who thought they knew every trick, every danger, every shadow the forest could throw at them. What they encountered would change the way they saw the world and themselves forever. The last story I have for you tonight comes from a group of 4 friends, Eli, Marcus, Danielle, and Chris, who had been camping together every summer since college. They prided themselves on their backcountry skills, always seeking out the most remote, untouched places they could find. For them, the deeper into the wilderness, the better. They'd weathered storms, crossed rivers, and even had a few close calls with wildlife, but nothing had ever truly shaken them. That would change on a trip to a stretch of forest in northern Minnesota, a place so far off the beaten path that even the locals called it the Forgotten Woods. It started as a challenge. Eli had found an old map online, marked with faded trails and cryptic notes. One spot in particular caught his eye, a clearing deep in the forest, miles from any road or marked campsite. The map simply called it the Hollow. There were no reviews, no photos, just a single warning scrawled in the margin: do not stay after dark. Naturally, that only made them more determined to go. They set out on a Friday morning, packs loaded with gear, spirits high. The hike was grueling, thick underbrush, fallen trees, and a constant swarm of mosquitoes. But the air was fresh, the sky clear, and the sense of adventure was intoxicating. By late afternoon, they reached the Hollow, a wide, grassy clearing surrounded by ancient pines. Sunlight filtered through the branches, painting the ground in shifting patterns of gold and green. It was beautiful, untouched, and eerily silent. They set up camp, built a fire, and spent the evening swapping stories and roasting marshmallows. As the sun dipped below the treetops, a strange hush fell over the clearing. The usual sounds of the forest, birds, insects, the distant call of an owl, faded away, replaced by a heavy, expectant silence. Danielle was the first to notice. It's too quiet, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Even for out here." Chris shrugged it off, but Eli felt it too, a pressure in the air, as if the woods were holding their breath. Marcus tried to lighten the mood, telling a ghost story about a haunted cabin, but the laughter felt forced, brittle. As night settled in, the fire became their only source of comfort. The darkness beyond seemed impenetrable, pressing in from all sides. They sat close together, their voices low, each of them glancing over their shoulders more than once. It was just after midnight when the first sound came, a distant, rhythmic thumping, like footsteps on soft earth. At first, they thought it was an animal, maybe a deer or a bear. But the steps were too regular, too deliberate. They seemed to circle the clearing, never coming closer, never moving away. Eli shone his flashlight into the trees, but the beam was swallowed by the darkness. "Hello?" he called, his voice echoing strangely in the stillness. No answer, just the steady thump, 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 moving around them in a slow, unbroken circle. Danielle gripped Chris's arm. "We should leave," she whispered. "Right now." But leaving wasn't an option. The trail back was treacherous in daylight. At night, it would be suicide. They decided to stay put, huddled around the fire, weapons close at hand. The footsteps continued for hours, never stopping, never changing pace. Sometimes they sounded closer, sometimes farther away, but always just out of sight. The friends took turns keeping watch, but exhaustion eventually won out. One by one, they drifted off, the fire burning low. Eli woke to the sound of whispering. At first, he thought it was the wind, but the air was still. The whispers grew louder, overlapping, a dozen voices speaking at once in a language he didn't recognize. He sat up, heart pounding, and saw that the fire had gone out. The clearing was bathed in moonlight, the trees casting long, twisted shadows. He looked around and realized, with a jolt of terror, that he was alone. The others were gone, their sleeping bags empty, their gear scattered. Panic surged through him. He called out for his friends, his voice cracking, but the only answer was the whispering, now coming from all directions. Eli grabbed his flashlight and stumbled into the trees, calling their names. The forest seemed to shift around him, the paths twisting and doubling back. The whispering grew louder, more urgent, until it felt like it was inside his head. He found Marcus first, standing motionless in a small clearing, eyes wide and unblinking. Eli shook him, but Marcus didn't respond. He just stared into the darkness, lips moving silently. Danielle was next, crouched behind a fallen log, rocking back and forth, her hands over her ears. Chris was nowhere to be found. Eli tried to lead Marcus and Danielle back to camp, but the woods wouldn't let them. Every path led back to the same spot, the same twisted tree with a scar down its trunk. The whispering never stopped, growing louder with every step. Finally, as dawn broke, the voices faded. The friends found themselves back in the hollow, the fire pit cold, their gear untouched. Chris was there, sitting by the ashes, staring at nothing. None of them spoke on the hike out. They didn't talk about what happened, not then, not ever. But something had changed. Marcus stopped camping altogether. Danielle moved to the city and never looked back. Eli still goes into the woods, but never alone and never at night. They say the forest is alive, that it remembers. Some places, once you've been there, never really let you go. After that night in the hollow, nothing was ever quite the same for Eli, Marcus, Danielle, or Chris. The woods had always been their sanctuary, a place to escape the pressures of everyday life, to reconnect with each other and with themselves. But now, The memory of that night lingered like a shadow, coloring every thought, every dream. It was as if the forest had marked them, leaving a scar that would never fully heal. Eli tried to rationalize what had happened. He scoured forums and message boards, searching for stories like theirs. He found tales of lost time, of voices in the night, of people who vanished without a trace. Some blamed the wind, the cold, the tricks of the mind. Others spoke of ancient spirits, of places where the veil between worlds was thin, but no explanation ever felt quite right. The memory of the whispering, the feeling of being watched, the way the woods seemed to twist and shift around them, none of it fit neatly into any box. Marcus, once the most fearless of the group, became withdrawn. He stopped answering calls, stopped showing up to gatherings. Danielle said he'd started having nightmares, waking up in a cold sweat, convinced he was still lost in the woods. Danielle herself moved to a high-rise apartment in the city, surrounding herself with noise and light, anything to keep the silence at bay. She told Eli once, in a rare moment of honesty, that she sometimes heard the whispering when she was alone, just at the edge of sleep. Chris was the hardest hit. He never spoke about what happened, not even to his closest friends. He quit his job, sold his camping gear, and moved back in with his parents. Eli visited him once, hoping to talk, to find some closure. But Chris just stared out the window, eyes distant, as if he was still searching for something in the trees. The story of the hollow spread quietly among the local hikers and campers. Some dismissed it as just another ghost story, a cautionary tale to keep kids from wandering too far. But others believed. They spoke in hushed tones about the clearing, about the strange silence that fell at night, about the people who went in and came out changed. Some said the woods were cursed, others that they were simply old, older than memory, and that some places were never meant to be tamed. What ties all three of these stories together isn't just the fear or the sense of being watched, or even the encounters with the unknown. It's the way the woods themselves seem to become a character, a living, breathing presence that shapes the experience. For Tyler, the forest was a predator, stalking him from the shadows. For Rachel, it was a conspirator, hiding the figure that circled her tent. For Eli and his friends, it was a labyrinth, twisting reality until they couldn't tell what was real and what was nightmare. There's a reason so many legends and ghost stories are set in the woods. The forest is a place of transformation, of mystery, of danger and beauty in equal measure. It's a place where the rules of the everyday world don't always apply, where the line between the natural and the supernatural blurs. When you step into the woods, you're stepping into another world, a world that doesn't care about your plans, your logic, or your need for answers. Maybe that's why these stories stick with us. They remind us that, no matter how much we think we know, there are still places in this world that defy explanation. Places where the old fears still live, just beneath the surface. Places where, if you're not careful, you might find yourself face to face with something you can't explain. If you're listening to this and thinking, that could never happen to me, you're not alone. Most people go camping and come back with nothing more than a few mosquito bites and some good memories. But every so often, someone comes back with a story that doesn't fit, that doesn't make sense, that leaves them looking over their shoulder for years to come. Maybe you've had an experience like that. Maybe you felt the woods watching you, or heard footsteps that didn't belong to any animal, or seen something in the darkness that you can't quite explain. If you have, you know that the fear doesn't end when you leave the forest. It follows you, a shadow at the edge of your vision, a whisper in the back of your mind. For those who haven't, consider this a warning. The woods are beautiful, yes, but they're also wild, unpredictable, and sometimes deeply unforgiving. The next time you find yourself alone in the forest, remember these stories. Remember Tyler, Rachel, Eli, Marcus, Danielle, and Chris. Remember that some places are better left unexplored, some silences better left unbroken. And if you ever find yourself in a place where the crickets stop singing, where the air grows heavy and the darkness seems to press in, trust your instincts. Pack up, leave, and don't look back. Because sometimes the woods don't want you there. And sometimes they make sure you never forget it. It's easy to dismiss these stories as just that, stories. Maybe you're listening in your living room, the glow of your phone or computer screen keeping the darkness at bay. Maybe you're thinking, I'd never let myself get into a situation like that. But the truth is, the people in these stories weren't reckless. They weren't thrill seekers or ghost hunters. They were just ordinary people looking for a little peace, a little adventure, a break from the routines of daily life. And that's what makes their experiences so unsettling. If it could happen to them, it could happen to anyone. There's a moment, just before you fall asleep in the woods, when the world feels impossibly vast. The trees stretch up into the darkness. The stars seem close enough to touch, and the only sounds are the ones you carry with you, your breath, your heartbeat, the crackle of the fire. In that moment, you feel both completely alone and completely connected to everything around you. It's a feeling that's hard to describe, but if you've ever camped in the deep woods, you know it. But that same vastness can turn on you in an instant. The darkness that once felt comforting becomes suffocating. Every sound is amplified. Every shadow seems to move. Your mind starts to play tricks on you, filling the silence with imagined threats. But sometimes, as these stories show, the threats aren't imagined at all. Rachel once described it as the forest turning against you. She said that after her encounter, she couldn't shake the feeling that the woods had been testing her, watching her, waiting to see what she would do. She started to notice things she'd never paid attention to before. The way the wind seemed to change direction without warning, the way the birds would suddenly go silent, the way the trees seemed to lean in just a little closer when she wasn't looking. For Tyler, the fear followed him home. He'd be sitting in his apartment, miles from the nearest tree, and suddenly feel that same prickling at the back of his neck, that sense of being watched. He started sleeping with the lights on, double-checking the locks on his doors and windows. He told himself it was just nerves, just the after effects of a bad scare. But deep down, he knew it was more than that. The woods had left their mark on him, and he wasn't sure he'd ever be free of it. Eli, for his part, became obsessed with understanding what had happened. He read everything he could find about the supernatural, about the history of the land, about the legends that haunted the forests of Minnesota. He found stories that echoed his own, stories of people who vanished, of voices in the night, of places where the rules of reality seemed to bend. But no matter how much he learned, he never found the answers he was looking for. The mystery only deepened, and with it, his sense of unease. What all three of them came to realize, in their own ways, is that the woods don't care about your plans, your logic, or your need for closure. The forest is ancient, indifferent, and sometimes it notices you. Sometimes it decides to remind you just how small and fragile you really are. There's a reason so many cultures have stories about haunted woods, about spirits that dwell among the trees, about places you're not supposed to go. The forest is a place of transformation, of danger and possibility. It's where the boundaries between worlds grow thin, where the past lingers just beneath the surface, where the unknown waits in the shadows. Maybe that's why we keep going back, despite the risks. There's something in us that's drawn to the wild, to the places where we're not in control. We want to test ourselves, to see what we're made of, to find out if we can face the darkness and come out the other side. But sometimes, the darkness is deeper than we expect. Sometimes it looks back. If you're still listening, maybe you're wondering what you would do in their place. Would you run? Would you fight? Would you freeze, paralyzed by fear? The truth is, you can never really know until you're there, until the darkness closes in and the silence becomes absolute. But there's one thing you can do, one thing all three of these survivors would tell you if they could. Trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is. If the woods go silent, if you feel watched, if you see something you can't explain, don't ignore it. Don't try to rationalize it away. Listen to that ancient part of yourself that knows when you're in danger. It might just save your life. And if you ever find yourself in a place like the Hollow, or alone by a lake in the Adirondacks, or deep in the Pine Barrens, remember these stories. Remember that the woods are older than you, older than your fears, older than the stories we tell to make sense of them. Respect that age, that mystery, that power. Because sometimes, the woods remember you, too. There's a strange comfort in the idea that the woods are just trees and dirt and shadows. That the things we fear are only in our heads. That the stories we tell are just echoes of ancient anxieties. But what if that's not true? What if, every so often, the woods really do reach out and touch us, leaving fingerprints we can't see but can always feel? What if the line between story and reality is thinner than we think? Imagine, for a moment, that you're the one out there. The fire has burned down to embers, the night is thick and silent, and you're lying in your tent, listening to the sounds, or the lack of them, just outside. You tell yourself it's nothing, that you're safe, that the world is as it should be. But then you hear it, a footstep, a whisper, the snap of a twig. Your heart starts to race. You hold your breath, straining to hear, to make sense of the darkness pressing in on all sides. You remember the stories you've heard, the warnings you've ignored. You think about Tyler, about Rachel, about Eli and his friends. You wonder if you'd be as brave or as lucky. You wonder if you'd make it out at all. The truth is, most of us will never know. Most of us will go camping and come home with nothing more than a few good stories and maybe a sunburn. But for those who do encounter something they can't explain, the experience is life-changing. It's not just the fear or the adrenaline or the sense of danger. It's the way the world seems to shift, to reveal a hidden layer just beneath the surface. It's the realization that, for all our technology and knowledge, we're still at the mercy of forces we don't understand. That's what makes these stories so powerful. They remind us that the world is bigger, stranger, and more mysterious than we like to admit. They force us to confront the possibility that we're not alone, that there are things out there that defy explanation, that the woods are not just a backdrop for our adventures, but a living, breathing entity with its own secrets and its own rules. Sometimes, those secrets are harmless, a strange light in the sky, a shadow that moves just a little too quickly, a feeling of being watched that fades with the dawn. But sometimes, they're not. Sometimes, the woods take something from us, a sense of safety, a piece of our sanity, a friend who never comes back. If you've ever felt that chill, that sense of being out of place, you know what I'm talking about. It's not just fear. It's awe, respect, and a kind of humility that's hard to find anywhere else. The woods don't care about your plans or your bravado. They don't care how many times you've been camping, how many survival shows you've watched, or how many stories you've heard. When the forest decides to remind you of its power, all you can do is listen. There's a reason people keep coming back with stories like these. It's not just about the thrill or the need to scare ourselves. It's about trying to make sense of the unknown, to put words to the things we can't explain. It's about sharing our fears, our doubts, our moments of vulnerability, in the hope that someone else will understand. Maybe that's why you're listening now. Maybe you've had your own encounter, or maybe you're just drawn to the mystery, the possibility that there's more to the world than what we can see. Either way, you're part of a long tradition, a tradition of storytellers, explorers, and dreamers who refuse to accept that the world is as simple as it seems. So the next time you find yourself in the woods, remember these stories. Remember the silence, the eyes in the darkness, the footsteps that circle your camp. Remember that the forest is older than you, older than your fears, older than the stories themselves. And remember that, sometimes, the only thing standing between you and the unknown is a thin layer of nylon, a dying fire, and your own fragile courage. If you're lucky, you'll never have to find out what's really out there. But if you do, trust yourself, trust your instincts, and never, ever ignore the feeling that something isn't right. Because sometimes, the difference between a story and a tragedy is just a single decision, a choice to listen, to leave, to respect the power of the woods. And if you ever find yourself telling your own story, years from now, sitting around a campfire or lying awake in the dark, remember, you're not alone. There are others who have seen what you've seen, felt what you've felt, and lived to tell the tale. The woods may be vast and mysterious, but so is the community of those who have faced them and come back changed. So, as you sit here now, maybe with the lights on, maybe glancing at the window or the shadows in the corner of your room, ask yourself, what is it about the woods that calls to us, even when we know the risks? Is it the promise of adventure, the hope of finding something new, or the thrill of facing the unknown? Or is it something deeper, a longing to reconnect with a world that is older, wilder, and more mysterious than we can ever truly understand? The stories you've heard tonight aren't just warnings. They're invitations to look closer, to listen harder, to respect the places that don't belong to us. They're reminders that, for all our knowledge and bravado, we are still guests in the wild, and the wild does not always welcome us. Sometimes it tests us, sometimes it teaches us, and sometimes it simply reminds us that we are not alone. If you ever find yourself deep in the woods, far from the safety of roads and cell towers, remember the silence. Remember the feeling of eyes watching from the darkness, the footsteps that don't quite match any animal you know, the sense that the world has shifted just a little, and that you are standing on the edge of something vast and unknowable. Trust that feeling. Respect it. Because the woods have a way of revealing truths we'd rather not face. And sometimes, those truths follow us home. Maybe you'll never experience anything like what Tyler, Rachel, Eli, Marcus, Danielle, or Chris did. Maybe your nights in the forest will be filled with laughter, stories, and the simple joy of being alive. But if you ever do find yourself in a place where the air grows heavy, where the silence is absolute, and where the darkness seems to press in from all sides, remember these stories. Remember that you are not the first to feel afraid, and you won't be the last. And if you ever come back with a story of your own, don't be afraid to share it. Because every story, every whisper, every shiver in the night adds to the tapestry of mystery that makes the woods what they are, a place of beauty, of danger, and of secrets that may never be fully understood. So, Before you plan your next camping trip, ask yourself, are you ready to face what waits in the darkness? Because sometimes the scariest stories are the ones that are true.